She didn't come?
She hasn't made it. I told her,
okay.
You must come. We're starting it. Maybe.
Okay, so let's start with the second part. The second part really is how the flood is understood in Chassidus. And
What's this got to do with marriage?
it doesn't. That was supposed to be the second class.
But you said...
Forget it. So the flood symbolizes the difficulties of, in the time of Chassidus, it's called Tirdot Parnasa. Okay? Why is it so difficult to make a living? And what's meant by that is not how many hours a day you put into it, because they used to work a lot more. Well, physically speaking, people used to work a lot more in order to be able to sustain themselves. And today, physically, we do very little manual labor. And yet, the mind is less clear and more preoccupied and suffering more from the whole process of making a living. And in our time, and this wasn't in the time of the Alter Rebbe when he wrote his Maimarim on Noach, in our time, it's also all the psychological problems that people suffer from, which don't necessarily have anything to do with Parnasa. And again, I have to make this distinction. The flood waters are what flood your mind. That's the idea. And they preoccupy your psyche.
Did you say wanders?
Flood waters.
Waters.
They flood your mind, and they don't let you concentrate on the ikar, on the main thing that you want to do. And
It's ADD and ADHD.
and it's not just that; it's everything. It's depression, it's bipolar, it's everything. In that sense, it's flood waters. And again, in their time, they called it Tirdot Parnasa, but really it's all the Tradot. The main word is not the Parnasa, the main word is the Tirda. And Tirda means that you're bothered all the time. What did you say?
Like bothers.
Okay.
What weighs you down?
It constantly preoccupies you. You can't free yourself to focus on what you want to focus on. So today we would say that maybe the last and final surge of water is the smartphone. Okay,
The what? Smartphone. I can testify.
which does the same thing to you. And there's a lot of studies coming out now. A lot of studies coming out that it really damages the ability to concentrate, and over time it damages the actual ability to, the actual cognitive ability of a person. So it's not exactly the same thing, because there's a little bit preoccupation with something else, but it's the same idea. So if you don't suffer from depression, you suffer from smartphone addiction or whatever it is. But the main point is that there's a lot more inability to focus on the task at hand than there used to be. What is the task at hand for a Jew? The task at hand is to serve Hashem, is to learn Torah and to pray and to do mitzvos. And you're constantly bombarded by all these different needs, all these different other foci that take away from your concentration. So why do I say that today this is coming out as all the psychological ailments that people suffer from? Because
every time you get an email, bing, like money.
It does not distract
like money.
me. I think I'm more focused. I think this thing's
Okay.
the best thing for me.
yeah, for some people it is. For most people, though, it isn't.
But you check
Okay.
your emails all the time.
Don't have to. Don't
So
have to.
how is this understood? So first of all, we have to understand why does the Alter Rebbe explain it this way? Where did he get this idea? So the passage in the Zohar that he notes, and really it's connected to the Haftarah that was chosen.
Is this printed here, what you're saying?
No. That's the second. That will be now the second part. So the passage that he quotes from the Zohar and is based on the Haftarah that was chosen for Noach. What's the Haftarah? The Haftarah is about or mentions at least, Noach in passing, and yet it was chosen for that. And in the Haftarah we find a verse that I will no longer be angry at you as I was in the time of Noach. And the mabul there in this verse is called Mei Noach, the waters of Noach. And the Zohar immediately asks, why would you call the flood after Noach? Noach was the only one who was righteous, who wasn't responsible for what happened. And yet he calls it Noach. So the Zohar says something incredible. He says, the reason it's called the floodwaters of Noach was that of course it was a punishment for the generation, but the long-standing effect was that Noach was elevated up, and the picture here is you have to think of the floodwaters as destroying everything on the bottom, on the earth, and raising the ark. And who's inside the ark? Noach and his family. So the reason it's called Mei Noach is not because of the punishment side, but because of the salvation side. And the salvation that occurred for Noach is like focusing what was the positive effect of the flood. And the positive effect is that it elevated Noach, it saved him, and it brought him into the focus of the rest of history. He became the second Adam, if you want. And from him, the rest of reality comes out of. So what is this a metaphor for, says the Alter Rebbe. That's what the Zohar says. So the Alter Rebbe says, so what is this a metaphor in our lives for? He says that whatever is flooding your life is there in order to raise an inner point, like the ark, that has to rise and float over the waters. That's what it's there for. So whatever this thing is that's causing you to lose your concentration, to be preoccupied, to make it impossible for you to follow what you really want to follow, don't think of it as just a hindrance, just something that's bothering you, but think of it as something that's like helping you figure out what is this thing, this point, this pintlach yid, as it's called in Chabad, that will rise above all of this, that will come into focus because of all of this. And in fact, you can't focus, the whole argument is, says the Alter Rebbe, you can't focus on what's really at the center and in the core of your being unless you fight it out with all these external hindrances, all these things, all these flood waters. You can never figure out what that is until that happens.
Listen, does this turn keeps going with Jacob's fight? Maybe?
So all the time there's a lot of conflict in order to, berurim it's called. But here, it's something interesting because the floodwaters themselves are not, in this case, they're not made into something positive yet. They're not something positive in and of themselves. What they cause, what they do, is that they force your point to come out. And this point, if you want, it's like this, it's that the floodwaters, they elevate a single point of earth above the rest. Let me explain this. This is a very important metaphor more in philosophy, but it was adopted by Chassidus also, that there's an order to earth, water, air, and fire. What's the order? That the earth has to be on the bottom, then there's water, then there's air, and then there's fire. When God, on the second day, revealed the earth, He undid the natural order of things. Because suddenly, you have earth higher than water. In order to do that, He had to do something before. The thing He needed to do before is first He had to split the waters into two. He had to make that there would be lower waters, and what's meant by lower waters is that in the waters themselves there's suddenly a type of water that has a tendency to fall lower than earth, which is not their natural state. Their natural state is to be higher than the land. Okay? Okay. As we said, it's earth, water, air, and fire. So he had to create within the waters. What the firmament does. It creates a separation between the higher and lower waters. You can think of them as having two different essences. The one essence is that it's the higher waters are the ones that are above the earth, and the lower waters are the ones that can go under, that can be under. In the flood, he undid the unnatural state. It's as if everything returned to the natural state. And what's the natural state? That there's water above the earth, and the water covered even the higher mountains by 15 cubits. And so all the earth was underneath the water, except for one piece of earth. What was that one piece of earth? No. No. The ark. The ark. The ark itself is the one piece of earth that floats above. And in fact, not only does it float above, but it's revealed that it's higher than even all the waters in their natural state, when there's no separation between higher and lower. What do we gain from this? So what this is saying is that in the psyche also, this point always remains, this point that when you find it, you suddenly you sense this, that it's always above all of reality, all of lower reality. It's always higher. It comes from a different place altogether. It's not the earth that's under the waters. It's something entirely different.
You mean the bottom of the ark? Because the ark's on top.
No, the ark is a piece of earth because it's dry land. And it's sitting on top of the waters now.
Even the waters would be naturally above.
Even in their natural state, all the earth is covered, and there's one small piece of earth called the ark that's floating on top. Nothing else is floating on top. It's the only one. It's the only piece.
I thought you said a piece of land.
It's a piece of land.
Still under.
All the land is under, except think of the ark as one piece of land, one dry plot of land that goes above all the waters.
So in the psyche, how do you
So what is this in the psyche? This is the whenever we talk about therapy. So we say that the most important part of therapy, and the thing with which you support a person. Right? The person needs support. The first thing, this is the main thing, is to be reminded that I have such a thing, such a point in me that can never be covered by the waters. It's always above everything. It's always breathing clean air. It's always living off its connection that it's one with Hashem.
That's the Nefesh Elokit.
It's even more than the Nefesh Elokit. Because the Nefesh Elokit here is actually like the waters themselves. This is even higher than that. Let's not get into that, why the Nefesh Elokit is like waters. But it's what the Alter Rebbe calls in the Tanya, the Ahava Mesuteret, the hidden love. The concealed love actually drinks water. It's fire that drinks water. That's the metaphor in the Gemara. I don't want to open too many parentheses, but in the Gemara there's a discussion about there being 6 types of fire. We once learned about this, at least something in passing. 6 types of fire. So there's a type of fire that drinks water. It's not put out by water, it drinks it. So Rashi there on the spout, he says, what kind of fire is this? It's the type of fire that a person has when he has a fever. So you see that when a person has a fever, what does he want to do? He wants to drink a lot. And it doesn't put the fever out, the drinking. You just need a lot. People say you need a lot of fluids. But what it means is that this fever is living off the water. It needs it. So if you don't drink, you'll just dry out because it'll drink whatever you have inside of you. It's like it dries you out. It dehydrates you.
That's what they say, that love is an illness.
Exactly. That's called cholat ahava. That's exactly what it's called. That we're sick with love. The ark is like the love sickness that we have for God, and it's always in a state of being higher than everything, the earth and the water. It's always like So what's the thing that's floating over the water? What's that called? We said that's air. Which air is that? When we first, in the second verse of the Torah, what does it say about the waters? It was normal, then it was normal. There was earth and the waters covered everything. What was above the waters? Ruach Elokim merachefet al pnei hamayim. What's this Ruach Elokim? Ruach Elokim, it says Rashi, it's the Chazal say, it's the spirit of the Mashiach. That's the Mashiach in you. That's the spark of Mashiach inside of you, which can never be drowned. There's no such thing. That's probably the most important thing when you start therapy, is to connect a person to that spot that forever remains above everything. And in fact, the reason that it's remaining above everything is that it's not just spiritual. It's actually fire that consumes water. That's why it's hovering very close to the water, because it needs the water to drink from in order to burn.
The air, but it's the fire.
It's like a fire in the air. The air is like on fire. And what it's drinking, that's why it's hovering very close to the water, it's drinking the water up. And in fact, the worse it gets, the stronger this point comes up. That's what the floodwaters are saying. That the more the world flooded, the more Noah's Ark was raised, higher and higher, until it became very clear that it's the only thing that exists. There's no other dry land here. So it's an incredible meta. It's telling you that understand that all these things that you're going through, whatever they are only in order for you to be able to recognize this point that never departs from God. It's always one with God entirely. And in fact, the way that you see it is because of the waters that are covering the earth. They're covering your mind, they're covering your life. You don't know where you're drowning, as it were. And then this point floats up to the top, and it begins to drink the water, to burn the water, as it were. So what does this look like? In normal life, what this looks like is that a person feels that he's drowning. So what does he do? He calls out to Hashem. One of the main things that a person has to learn from all his troubles is to cry out to Hashem. And people don't learn that. It's unbelievable. We daven, but we don't cry out. It's not the same thing.
It won't engulf all this stuff unless you cry out, or it will anyway.
Then it'll begin to burn the water. That's what I said. It's fire. No. When you begin to recognize this point, you begin to elevate it. It begins to come up. That's the cry that comes out.
What does it do until then?
It's underneath. It's waiting for you to decide that you want to recognize it. Until you recognize that point inside of you that's never underwater, that's always above, when you cry out, you're not crying from that point, you're crying for that point. You're crying for that point to be revealed.
So it's not like you're actually by crying, it brings it to the surface. It actually is there.
Right.
It's never under the surface.
Even when it's underneath, it's not underneath. There's no such thing. It's always above.
That's it.
But you don't see it.
It's concealed.
Right. It's concealed. That's why it's called Ahava Mesuteret. It's concealed love. But it's always 100% able to be entirely above. But unfortunately, the only way that it comes out is when you begin to feel the pressure of life. If you don't feel the pressure of life, you don't get to this point where you're looking for it even.
Like in Mitzrayim, when they pull out, then Hashem...
Right. It says that was exactly the whole story there. That there they weren't under water, they were under the labor that they had to do. But the main point about the labor was that they were preoccupied, that they didn't have time to do anything except labor. When a person is facing an illness, especially any kind of psychological illness, that's exactly their situation. But from that's where you discover this point. And that's why the whole thing was done in the first place. For you to discover this point that is always connected, otherwise you'll never know. There's no way that you will figure this out. You'll just go through life, you'll just cruise through it, never knowing that you have something that's always 100% intact, connected to God, is healthy, is breathing air. It's an island of life, and it itself, when it begins to function, it'll dry up all the waters.
It didn't seem to affect Noah that way. He wasn't.
Why not?
Because he was compared to Abraham, not as
Okay, so
great.
let's see how Noach was like this, because we said that the mabul, the flood waters, were a punishment for the wicked people of that generation. What about Noach? Noach wasn't wicked. He was tzaddik tamim haya b'dorotav. He was a righteous person. So what was it for Noach? And this is where the Alter Rebbe gets his idea. For Noach, this was tardot parnasa, the difficulty of making a living. Why? How does he get to that? Where do we see that Noach suddenly had troubles?
Busy with the animals all the time.
Okay, so that's also, but you're right that it's like he's introduced into a world where there's so much toil.
Before that, you mean?
But before that, where do we see that there was no, and this Alter Rebbe makes very clear, there was no feeling of being preoccupied. Meaning people weren't, because they were busy in the field, they couldn't think. No, they could think very clearly. In fact, in the time of the temple, it says the same thing, that the description in the Tanakh is ish tachat gafno v'tachat te'enato, that each person is under his vine and under his fig tree, which means that every person is independent in the sense that they don't have worries, meaning they have sustenance. And again, it doesn't matter how much you have. You could have a lot and you could have little, and you could have a ton of work, physical work to do, and you could have little work to do, and it has no bearing, it has no connection to how preoccupied your mind is. You become worried and preoccupied because of something else. Why? Because you're not connected above, because you feel that you're drowning down here. That's really what's happening. And what happened to Noach? So why was he called Noach? So his father Lemech said, "Ze yenachamenu mimaaseh adeinu umitzvon ha'adama asher kilela Hashem." That he's the one who will console us from the toil of our hands. And then what did Noach do? How did he console everybody? He invented the plow.
Oh, right.
Okay.
But that was later.
No. This was before the flood.
Oh.
He invented the plow. And what do you call that when you invent something? Today we call it a startup. So Noach had a startup called the Plow Incorporated. And when you got a startup, now you're going to be preoccupied. It was easy until then, because there's a book by, I don't want to mention his name right now, but the book by one of the holier people from 2 generations ago. So he says, when in the teens in Eretz Yisrael, he said, nobody had any problems. Why? Because nobody had anything.
You didn't have any belongings.
There's no problems. And it's not just because so much of having problems is that the other person has and I don't.
Why do you want to say you said this?
I'll tell you later.
Because it will start a whole discussion.
Good. I don't want to get into this discussion. So he said, when nobody had anything, it was simple. You couldn't look at your neighbor and say, so when am I going to buy that new oven? Nobody had anything, period. Everybody was dirt poor. So there's nothing to... So even though you have to work for your living, you're not preoccupied with it. You're not worried about, is it going to be this amount, or is it going to be that amount? Who cares? I don't have anything anyway. Anything I get is good. It's a completely different type of thinking. Now, when you do a startup, that's exactly what you go into this world of pain, which is full of all this, and Noach invented the plow, so of course 2 months later, his neighbor also invents the plow, and somebody else invents the plow, and now he's got all this competition, he's got right? How did he was an engineer, but when he figured it out, everybody figured it out. He threw the whole world into this startup mentality. And suddenly, these are the floodwaters in terms of Noach. That's even though it wasn't a punishment for him, but it's named after him also for that for that spiritual side of the world that He brought us into, or brought them into at that time, that suddenly there was this thing of getting ahead. There was suddenly this thing of becoming more successful and more productive. This whole idea of you can be more productive, that doesn't make any sense if you want to live quietly. If you want to live quietly, what does it matter that I can be more productive? As long as I'm sustaining myself, who cares? Because people think, if I have the newer model, I'll work less, and then I'll have spare time. But they don't realize, in your spare time, what are you going to do? You're going to worry about paying for the newer model. So you never finish. It's like, on the contrary, work with the old model. It doesn't matter, as long as it works. And that's it. And you don't have to ever replace anything. I know it's a strange mentality, because, but the world can't function that way. Noach was right. There has to be flood waters, but the real flood waters are such that you want to learn more, you want to know more, and so on. Unfortunately, they become a flood, not just a little bit of water, they become a flood, and then you drown. And in the end, so is it good or not good? So says Hashem, it is good. Why? Because from all this turbulence that you've created, trying to get ahead, in the end, something will rise to the top. The ark will rise to the top. And when the ark rises to the top, what you will have discovered is that part of you, which is really what you were looking for, without knowing you were looking for it, that is always bound and one with the Almighty. It's always bound with the essence of Hashem. In fact, it's called, this is what we call Lishtaba begufa de malka, to be consumed by the body of Hashem. That's how the Zohar calls it. The body of Hashem is what we call the eternal connection to Hashem. It's not even to any of His revelations. That's what they are. Lishtaba. It's like comes on. No. It's an aleph. It's like to be sucked into. Lishaev el gufa melech. To be sucked into the body of the king. Okay. Gufa doesn't really mean body, it means the etzim, the essence. The gufa in Aramaic means the etzim of the Inyan. In Hebrew, there's no word for it. Eventually, the Tibunim translated it into etzim. In English, you say the thing in and of itself, but there's no good translation in English. So that's what you get, and then when you come to that situation, then it becomes what the Zohar says, Naicha le'ilah la'ilyonim, naicha letata, naicha letachtonim. It becomes a state of tranquility. Naicha. Noach really means tranquility. Again, what would we say here? That Noach started out as being the big promise that humanity will reach tranquility. And yet he throws us into this whole terrible rat race. But in the end, because of all these difficulties of life, what was revealed was this ark, which represents this point that's always bound in Hashem. It's always sucked into the essence of Hashem. It wants to be sucked into. And when you reveal that point, then it's called naicha, then it's called tranquility. And really, the end of the story of before the waters go down, and really, why did the waters go down? Why do waters ever, in a normal state, where do the waters go? The earth absorbs them. Here, there's also an understanding that it's not exactly that the earth absorbed them. That, like we said, this fire above consumes the water. It's like charava. Charava is like it's burnt. It's almost like the water was burnt off the land. In the psyche, what it means is that, on the contrary, the tranquility that I have floating above is actually slowly lowers the waters, because it's like it lives off these waters, off this flood that you're into. It can't live any other way. Now, give me an example.
Can you say boils the water away?
It's like it burns it away. It could be that it boils, but it consumes it, it evaporates it more than anything else. Again, in the body, it's hot, but it's not burning hot. It's not like you're on fire. So it's more like I don't know how to say it. Evaporates it in some way. I guess that's also why it took 150 days until it came down, and.
At 50.
Huh?
At 50, that's done.
150.
100.
Okay.
Like 150 kg.
Okay, maybe. Yeah, could be. Can very much could be. That those 150 days are like it's very important parallel identity. So, what is that like? It's like a tzaddik. A person who's really a tzaddik, and he's found this point already. So bring him all the problems. Bring it to him. It's okay, because he's tranquil above all this stuff that you bring to him. He consumes it. He'll like make it evaporate. And he perspires. But he takes it. He takes it. And he takes it. On the contrary, right. No, he helps you find your thing. But he's got everybody's. You have your one little flood. He's got all the floods together. And it's good for him. He feels like, that's what I am. I'm the ark on top of these flood waters. And I'm constantly, that's like how you have to think of a good therapist. That's how he has to be. He has to be that, he has to find himself constantly. That's why I said, if you can't, I've said this a lot of times, that if you can't feel positive and optimistic about the person who's coming to you and his future, that it's good, if you can't see him with a good eye, you shouldn't take care of him. You have to, first of all, be able to see. That's what it means to support. To support is not, I can't deal with your problems. That's not what a tzaddik does. A tzaddik doesn't say, it's one of my proofs that I'm very far from it, because every time somebody comes to me with a problem, I try to solve it for them. But what the tzaddik really does is he gives you enough encouragement, gives you enough perspective to see your ark on top of the waters so that you can get to this point of tranquility and evaporate your own waters. He doesn't do it for you. It's because he's there, he shows you that there is such a place. And you can say that's the most important thing in therapy. If you're not like that with respect to this person, that's why coaches are usually, like, let's say the classic coach, back when the word coach meant the guy who runs the soccer, track and field team, whatever, back in the good old 80s and 70s and 60s. So coaches were always athletes, were retired, and they always, to this day, they're the retired athletes. They're the ones who've been through all of it, and they've seen it through. You can coach only if you can see it through, if you've been there and done that. You have to be able to rise above where the person you're coaching is. You have to be able to see that it's possible. You don't know exactly here how it's possible. You're not going to solve it for them here. But you know that it's possible, that they have it within them to be able to surmount this, to gain this perspective that's tranquil above everything else.
But is it really is it essential that the counselor has fully rectified the thing that they do identify with?
So we said that yes, we talked a lot about this, that the famous story from the Middler Rebbe, that somebody came to him with necrophilia, and he didn't know what this was until he found it himself. The same thing with the song that he says, I continue a nigun after it's over. That's like necrophilia. So once he rectified it in himself, it's not that he told him, what do you do? I don't think he told him what to do exactly, but he came from a position, it's possible to rectify this.
But possible to rectify is different from I fully rectified.
No, he fully rectified it in himself.
On the spot, though.
He said it for him, it took a day and a half. It wasn't on the spot. It still took him a day and a half or 2 days, however long he was saying Tehillim, and didn't see anybody. During that time, he was circumspecting himself and introspecting and trying to figure out, what do I do with this problem myself? Once he solved it in himself, once he had seen it through himself, he could give the support that was needed to the person that was suffering from it in a very coarse and terrible way. But it's the same issue. That's the main thing. It's still the same issue. So in that sense, yes, you have to have been there. You can't really help somebody if you haven't been there. So So there's all kinds of ideas today that that's not the real role of a therapist. It's more to gain understanding and to help a person from where he is and so on. But that's not what we ascribe by. We ascribe by the fact that these things can be handled completely, but it depends on you're finding this ark that is above the waters. Okay? If you can't find the ark if you can't get this ark to rise, this point in your heart that is always eternally bound to Hashem, to rise above the waters, you can't gain that tranquility that the other person also needs. And the same thing is with children. I mean, with children, we see it so clearly. They come with, I scraped my knee, I did this. Settle, nothing happens. Not that you're not suffering, you're not this, but it'll be okay. And that perspective is what helps them get through it. Because I can't go through it for you. You can't solve it by looking at me and I'll do it for you. I can't do it for you. That's why I'm me and you're you. Because each one of us has his own flood that he has to climb to the top of. But once I found my Tevat Noach that's come to the surface for me, it gives perspective for where you are. And that's what it means to support. It's not to somehow solve the problem. I don't know what the solution to the problem is, but I've seen a solution. Yeah, I've seen that it's solvable. Okay? And the main point in the solution is that I always have this point that is 100% connected to Hashem. That's the ark. Okay. So that was there's a lot more to be said. Again, in the Alter Rebbe's time, he describes it as the preoccupation and the disturbing nature of making a living. In fact, he says something incredible. He says, he doesn't say this, the Midler Rebbe says this, that what the sages said, and the Rambam paskins for halacha, that the only difference between our reality, which is called Shiabud Malchuyot, and Yemot HaMashiach, and the days of Mashiach, is that there will not be tirdot parnasa. There will no longer be tradot. Take the parnasa because it's not the main thing. There will no longer be something preoccupying you. You will be clear. That's what Shiabud Malchuyot means. There's a lot more to be said about this. This all has to do with that in the state of Golus, we don't eat directly from Hashem's hand. Right. Everything goes through a lot of intermediaries. Yes. So because of the intermediaries, that's what's called Shiabud Malchuyot. It's being under the hand of the nations. Being under the nations don't see Hashem as one and directly. The nations don't have a concept of Hashem having a personal relationship with a man. They can't. In the end, they always have to stick something in the middle. They're stuck with this. They can't. You say the main difference between real monotheism and false monotheism is that in false monotheism you'll always find that there's intermediaries stuck in between, that without which the whole deal doesn't function. For instance.
And we say our God doesn't need a son to help him.
So, in any case,
Our God doesn't need a son to help him.
in any case, we'd have to say that it doesn't matter. You can have intermediaries and still not see them as in the middle. That's not the issue. It's not how many names you call Hashem in the middle. It's whether they're all one or not. Mm-hmm. If they're not all one, then that's where it becomes false. In any case, so he says that the ability to remove these hindrances, these things that preoccupy, make you lose your concentration on on what you are and who you are and where you're going, those. That's what it means to be in Golus. That's what it means to be under Shiabud Malchuyot. And in practice it comes out as, for instance, that you feel that you can't be free, meaning you're eating from somebody else's hand. You're dependent on a million different things to happen. That's why there's so many stories in Chassidus that some nobleman came to his Moshe, to his Moshke, and said to him, "Who gives you your parnasa? Who gives you your livelihood?" And he says, Hashem. He gets really angry. The whole point is that you're supposed to recognize that it's me who gives it to you. But simple faith, and that's what it means, that's one of the meanings of finding the ark, is to recognize that it's Hashem who's giving me the sustenance, the livelihood, regardless of how many hands it went through. It doesn't matter. How many hands it changed on the way has no meaning at all. You can have 1 million in the way, you have 2 million. Jews are not stupid. We don't think that the sun is God. So we know that Hashem makes the sun shine and the sun gives us energy, and that's where our whole food cycle starts from. We know all this. But in the end, who's doing all this? Hashem is doing all this. That's it. In the end, I don't feel that the sun is something worthy of being worshipped. I don't feel that it's something that I can take out of this chain of circumstances, of causes, and focus on it and make it into a God in and of itself. None of these things become my God. Rather, it's all miyado aptucha hagdusha v'archava. That's all from Hashem's open hand. That's where I'm eating from.
It's cheaper when it's direct. It costs less.
Noah spent how many years building the ark? I mean, he was building.
120 years. Yeah.
120 years, isn't it? Was that?
Talk about being preoccupied.
Yeah. It's the key to bring that down in a way. It's not that it exists right within us, this dimension, but it seems at the same time it has to be built.
There's a sikha from the Rebbe that is very connected to this, what you just mentioned, based on something from the Rogachover, especially in Parshat Noach. The Rebbe has a strong connection with the Rogachover and a lot of things. We'll see another one in a moment. But from the Rogachover, he learns that, you mentioned not being helped by sons, that Noach could not be helped by any person to build the ark. He had to build it entirely by himself. So in therapy, that's exactly the point. I can't build it for you. I can only show you that there are arcs. I can show you a plan, I can show you one that works. But you have to build your own. I can't do it for you. So he says so much that they weren't allowed to hold a nail, even his sons. They couldn't help him carry it. He had to do everything entirely. That's why it took him 120 years. Because really it's not so difficult to build it. But if you need to do it all by yourself and these huge planks. The plow he did when he was younger. He was 500 when he started. He was 500 when he started building the ark.
So he was a old man. Get a pension.
Okay.
Get a pension, it's great.
Yeah, from the startup, the Plow Incorporated, he had options. He didn't even have a pension. That's probably how could he have bought all the stuff? He was a rich man. He's like, right? Okay. So now
What happened afterwards with that ark, with the table?
What happens to all wooden objects after time? They deteriorate and fall apart. except for Michiganist Christians who look for it everywhere in the world. Because they can't take the.
Everything fishy.
They have to have a physical. Nah. Nothing lasts for 4,000 years. Okay.
Yeah, but the Ark of
It's
the
that
Covenant.
part, it's still there.
The Ark of the Covenant is a presumably.
So it's made out of gold. It's a whole different thing. It shouldn't fall apart. There's no reason for it to fall apart. It's like from archaeology, what's the main thing that we find?
Metal.
Coins. Because metal lasts.
And they found a pomegranate. From the
No, but it can't be an actual pomegranate. Yeah, it's a palmon, but it's metal. I thought you meant a real pomegranate.
I'll take it.
A rimon, palmon verimon. The rimon were like little
made out of what?
silver. Okay, so now, this I owe the second part to Ziv Ritchie, Professor Ritchie's son, who half a year ago he walks into our Chabad house, and he tells me an incredible pshat. He just finished learning Masechet Brachot, and he tells me an incredible pshat. This guy is way out of everybody's league, but he doesn't know what to do with it. It's such an incredible pshat that it was like I'm still living off of it. It was half a year ago. I'm still going through it, thinking about it is unbelievable. And the only question is, did Shmuel, as we'll see, or in general, did the Gemara mean this, or is it just by their Holy Spirit, by their Ruach HaKodesh, that they were able to incorporate this into what they said? Meaning, were they really aware of what I'm going to tell you now, or is it just that it fits so perfectly, but just because they had Ruach HaKodesh, they had some amount of Holy Spirit in them? So let's see. Sorry, now that's me. Sorry. That's all.
Talking about
That was to illustrate how cause and effect works, right? One thing pulls something else. One thing is tied to the next, and everything falls together. Okay. So let's see. The question that this is very different than anything we've ever done, but it ties in a little bit to our topic, because what we ended with is that you have to see through the cause and effects that happen in life, or for instance, how your livelihood comes down through all these hands. You have to see that it's all Hashem. And this is one of the things that people have a real difficult issue with. Again, because this is what it means to rise above the waters. It means to be able to see that this is all Hashem. That's really that point. That point is always bound eternally to Hashem. It feels that everything that's happening is really Hashem. There's nothing wrong with it per se. It's just that it's there for you to uncover, to go above it, to recognize that Hashem is hovering over the waters, that the Spirit of Hashem is hovering over the waters. So, for some people, it's very important that the flood be some kind of miracle. If it's not a miracle, what's the point? There's only one place that I know of, but it doesn't mean that I know all the places. But there's one place that I am aware of that the sages say, don't make this into a natural event, because it was entirely a miracle. What is that place? The 10 plagues in Egypt.
Not Kriyas Yamsuf?
And of course, Kriyas Yamsuf goes with that together. It's one unit. That don't turn into something. Don't look for how that. There's no natural event that parallels this, and that would be an explanation for how this was done. These are mamash plagues. They're one of a kind type of events, and they're special. They're unique. It's very telling that again, there's all a very Christian frame of mind, that you have to show that everything is somehow, I don't know, some kind of natural event. Otherwise, people won't. Like the ark, it has to exist somewhere, because if you don't show that it exists somewhere, so the story isn't true. Okay, you have to make. There's a guy in Canada. I don't remember, and I don't want to mention his name. I don't remember what it is. So another one of these who makes his living out of proving that all these things happen. So unfortunately, when it came to Yiddishkeit, the main thing, he's a Jew, he's a Baal Tshuva even. Unfortunately, the thing that he tackled, he decided to show was all a natural event, was the Exodus. The plagues and
the eastern wind that blew the whole night.
Ken
So
said
this is to show that it was not a miracle, it was the wind.
No, but here is explaining that the amount that it brought, and that it could come in one day, they never come in one day, and that they left overnight, and they were all drowned in the sea. That all was, of course, the locusts themselves were actual locusts. They weren't like nanoparticles running around or something. A swarm of extraterrestrials. Drones, right? Okay. Anyway. But with the Mabul, there's no such thing that I know of. And on the contrary, the Rebbe talks a lot about the main purpose that we try to attain when it comes to thinking about the world that we live in should be that the greatest miracles are the ones that are enclosed within nature. Because really, what does it mean to see a miracle? That everything in nature is really Hashem. Hateva equals Elokim. Nature equals God. And that's exactly what we said about the ark rising above the waters. It's to see that you're only eating from Hashem's hand. So it doesn't matter how many hands it's passing in the middle. It doesn't matter. They're all Hashem. So incredibly, in the Talmud, there is a description of how Hashem made the flood. There's a description.
Wait, in the Talmud.
Okay. In Masechet Bachot, Daf, and this is what you have here in front of you, the pages that I gave out.
Yeah.
They should be. So let's read first the description of how Hashem made the flood. Okay? So it's in the English, it's the second page. In English, it's the second page, and it's the line that starts appended. You see the line that starts appended on the second page? Okay.
Where is it?
Appended.
Okay? The Gemara explains, after the appended, the Gemara explains, and the fact that Ursa Major follows Pleiades.
Yeah.
Ignore these two words. They're translated here. In Hebrew, they're Kima and Ksil. Okay? But here they translate them because they think they know what they are. Which is okay. This is how they were translated for at least a millennia. If you would ask somebody who learned Talmud,
What's the Hebrew again?
Kima and Ksil. We'll see in a moment in the Hebrew. So, if you would ask somebody who was learning Gemara by Rashi, what do these two words mean? Kima and Ksil. I'm almost certain that he would take you out at night and he would show you,
La grande ours, la petite.
right, the little bear and the big bear, right? Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. So Ursa Major. And Pleiades. What's Pleiades? So Pleiades is Orion's belt, if I'm not mistaken, or whatever, something like that. We'll see in a minute, because I didn't read through the English exactly. So he would show you that it's talking about these two star formations. So it says, as it is related, the Gemara explains, and the fact that Ursa Major follows Pleiades, it is as if Ursa Major is saying to Pleiades, give me back my children, my two stars. Okay? So that's what you see in the sky. Like you would see, the one's following the other. It looks like one's following the other. Why? Because one's saying to the other, give me back my two sons. By the way, if you go with somebody who's a good astronomer, and they know a little bit of the mythologies behind the constellations and so on, and you go out to Mitzpe Ramon or somewhere where you can actually see stars, and get an explanation, they'll explain things like this, exactly of this nature. You know, why this one, he looks like he's got his hand out, because he's, all these things. Give me back my two children. Where do they come from? As it is related, when the Kadosh Baruch Hu sought to bring a flood into the world, he took two stars from Pleiades, and brought the flood upon the world. And afterward, when he wished to fill the void, he took two stars from Ursa Major and filled the void with them. So he took from Pleiades, two stars. So what? Settle. That's what it says. He took two stars. And then he had to fill the void there, because it can't be a void. So he went to Ursa Major, and he took two of hers, and he gave it to Pleiades. So now Ursa Major is angry that... Consequently, the constellation of Ursa Major attempts to persuade Pleiades, seeking to get its stars back. The Gemara asks, listen how weird this is, and return it.
Right.
Why did the Kadosh Baruch Hu not restore the original two stars to Pleiades? Just give her back. The Gemara answer is, a pit cannot be filled by its own earth.
Pick.
If you dig a hole in the ground, it's called, that you can't make a hole in the ground, take the earth out, and then fill it up with the earth that you took out. It's like a crazy thing, but that's how it works.
By its owners? What is the owner?
Not the owners. You make a hole in the
It can't
ground.
be fixed by its
You can't fill the hole with the earth that you took out. It'll never fill the hole up.
in the beginning.
Is it merges? Like what happened?
Cannot be fixed by.
It cannot be filled. Why? I'm reading. Just read it.
But he's saying you won't fill it in exactly.
Yeah.
Here,
Some
here.
pieces of it.
Here.
Ah,
It's just
a pit by its own.
Is there a scientific reason for that? Like, what's the
I don't know if it's a scientific thing. It's like a reality. The people know that when you dig a hole, when you
pour
plant.
water out of a glass. It's never quite the same amount when you pour it back.
But Earth is different.
Also, so there you can say a little bit.
Let's say you had a machine that actually took it all.
Theoretically, there's conservation of matter, but you can never conserve matter. It doesn't work. In reality, it doesn't work. Okay,
I don't get it. Why it can't work.
so it doesn't. Try dig a hole once and try to fill it back up with.
Go to
You didn't play enough on the
Wait,
seashore
wait,
when you were.
Wait. If you try to fill it back up with the same earth
Right.
that came out
You
of
can't
it.
fill it up all the
You
way.
need fresh.
You need more. You need to add more. Alternatively, one could say that a prosecutor cannot become an advocate. What do we mean? Since these stars, meaning Pleiades, caused the flood, it is not appropriate that they facilitate the end of the flood. Meaning that you can't take what caused the flood and put it back, because now what will people say? They'll hate Pleiades. They'll say, you know, those two stars, they were the ones that caused the... okay. The Gemara argues, then God should have created two other new stars for Pleiades. New ones. Nobody would say that these are the ones that caused it. The Gemara responds, there is nothing new under the sun. Under the sun? You're talking about under the sun? We're talking about stars in the sky. What are you talking about? What do you mean under the sun? This is a key statement. It's like when Ziv told me that he didn't get to this point, but when I read it later, I said, like, I don't know how this man got this. It's unbelievable.
That's where it comes from? En Chadash
We'll see. Ken, En Chadash Hashem is from Kohelet.
What was the
There's nothing new under the sun. Rav Nachman said, in the future, the Kadosh Baruch Hu will restore these same stars to Ursa Major, as it is stated, meaning he'll give it back to her, not the Pleiades. Pleiades took from Ursa. Okay? But now Ursa is lacking too, so we'll give it back to her, as it is stated, or can you guide Ursa Major with her sons? Which is interpreted homiletically in the sense of consolation, tanchumin, tanchem, nechama. Apparently due to the restoration of those stars. So that's a story about, strange story about how the flood occurred. In another place in the Gemara, it says it even more clearly. I don't remember whether it's other, maybe if I would open, but I don't have time now. So, in other places it says it even more clearly that he took two stars from this place called Kima, and he threw them. It's not clear what it means that he threw them. What do you mean? What do you throw stars? What is he talking about? Okay. So for centuries this was read. And again, I don't know if people connect. I searched far and wide. Nobody says anything close to what I'm going to tell you now. And I don't think it was possible to say anything like this until the last century, because we know so much more about the space than they did. But you'll see in a second that somehow the Gemara is at least hinting to the fact that it knows all this, what we're going to say. How do I know? Okay, so first of all, to understand what we're going to read now, we have to understand something about comets. Okay? What is a comet? What is an asteroid? So here I have, right after the Gemara, so these are from Wikipedia. And this is where Ziv's genius comes in, because he saw the connection. And most people know that there is an asteroid belt after Mars. Between Mars and Jupiter, there is an asteroid belt. So let's read about it. The asteroid belt is a circumstellar disk in the solar system located roughly between the orbits of the planets Mars and Jupiter. It is occupied by numerous irregularly shaped bodies called asteroids or minor planets. The asteroid belt is also termed the main asteroid belt or main belt to distinguish it from other asteroid populations in the solar system, such as near-Earth asteroids and Trojan asteroids. Okay? These are all still located between Mars and Jupiter. Trojans also, and the near-Earth objects, all these are pretty much in the neighborhood until Jupiter. Beyond Jupiter, we don't find any small objects, as you'll see. There's no asteroids. And we'll explain what we do find there in a minute. Okay? About half the mass of the belt is contained in the four largest asteroid Ceres, Vesta, Pallas, and Hygiea. The total mass of the asteroid belt is approximately 4% that of the Moon, or 22% that of Pluto, and roughly twice that of Pluto's moon Charon, whose diameter is 1,200 kilometers. Ceres is pretty big. It's about 950 kilometers in diameter. So, and what are these asteroids? They're rocks. They're basically rocks, and they're floating around. So read about it if you want later, how what the theory about where these asteroids came from, what they're doing there. In general, the idea is that they're mass that didn't collect into planets. So they're like, okay. Now what people know less about is a second belt called the Kuiper belt. Kuiper and I can't say that.
K-E-I-P-E-R?
Kuiper, yeah, it says here in the Kuiper belt.
How do you pronounce it? Kuiper.
Kuiper. It's like a Kuiper. Okay. Sometimes
With the
it's a copper belt.
U with the
It's German.
It's Dutch. It's Dutch.
That's why you.
Sometimes called the Edgeworth-Kuiper belt, is a circumstellar disk in the solar system beyond the known planets. There's another asteroid belt. Okay, they're also sort of asteroids, I guess, but not exactly asteroid belts, as we'll see in a second, extending from the orbit of Neptune at 30 astronomical units. And this astronomical unit is the distance between the Earth and the Sun. Okay, so it's from 30 times the distance of the Earth to the Sun out, meaning it's from Neptune all the way to approximately 50 astronomical units. So it's still the solar system, meaning it extends beyond Pluto. And in fact, today, Pluto is considered to just be part of the Kuiper belt. It's not considered a planet anymore. It's a small planet, it's a dwarf planet, whatever they call it, but it's like Ceres. It's an asteroid, basically. Except that it's big enough that it became round. If you look at Ceres, Ceres looks like a chunk of something. It's not round because it has orbital spin, but the spin isn't strong enough, and the mass isn't strong enough to make it round in the end. It's like the same thing when if you just started with a dough, when you put it in your hand, it looks like Ceres. When you start molding it, you make it into, or when you do it on the counter, it slowly becomes round. It is similar to the asteroid belt, but is far larger, 20 times as wide, and 20 to 200 times as massive. So if we said that the whole asteroid belt was 4% that of the Moon, this is maybe 200 times that. So it's at least like, what would that come out to? 200 times 4 is 800, 8 moons. 8 moons is already almost the Earth. Okay? So this thing has a lot of mass. There's a lot of mass there, and it's all distributed in all these small asteroids. But it's a little bit different. Like the asteroid belt, it consists mainly of small bodies or remnants from when the solar system was formed. While many asteroids are composed primarily of rock and metal, like the inner asteroid belt, most Kuiper belt objects are composed largely of frozen volatiles, termed ices. And there's two main types. One is called methane. It's icy methane. It's methane that was frozen and becomes ice. And ammonia, there's another type with ammonia, and water. There's chunks of huge things that think about Ceres, 150 kilometers wide of water out there. Okay? That's more water, if I'm not mistaken, than there is on Earth. But I'm not sure. In just one of these. But again, if you take the whole mass, I don't know if a third is water, or half is water, I don't know what there's more, we don't know so much about it. We know a little bit about it, but we don't know so much because it's too far away. You can't really see it with a telescope. The best pictures of Pluto, which is the biggest object there, were terrible until the last, what was the guy's called? No, it was just a flyby last year. They finally reached Pluto with an actual satellite. What's it called? What was it called? It was a big deal. We now have a full picture. We have a full. No, it wasn't called Discovery.
Wait a Neptune, he's so
Here we go.
Check Neptune.
This is really hard.
I forgot the name. It was a big deal. You didn't watch it live? It was like 24 hours of live NASA TV of the whole thing.
We had other things to worry about than to watch.
You had other things preoccupying you.
Exactly.
You didn't realize that Hashem was showing for the first time something that had never been seen.
You were a representative.
Yeah.
I guess so.
It's a sign.
It's not called Cassiopeia. It's some of the name like Cass something. Another one of these names. Anyway,
Last year?
last year. We now have a full picture of Pluto, like from 50,000 miles out. It's like a pretty much.
Habitable.
Do a picture.
Can you go
No, it's ice. It's ice. It's complete ice. It's like all the other objects there. It's ice. Anyway,
Clyde? No.
no. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
New Horizons?
No. Yeah, the New Horizons aircraft. That's what it was called.
The answer for it
Right.
to Pluto on July 14, 2015. It flew 12,500 kilometers.
How many?
12,500.
Oh, okay. So it's a quarter of what I thought. Okay,
It's an interplanetary space probe,
right. New Horizons.
part of NASA's New
Right.
Frontiers
Okay.
Johns Hopkins University?
Yeah. It was Space Telescope Science Center.
Any picture of Pluto?
Yeah, where's Pluto? We want to see the probe.
Who cares about the probe? Show us- Okay. Anyway, so that's the Kuiper belt. So most of them are ice. Almost all of them are ice. Some of them are no. I don't know but there's a lot of water there. But this is all nothing, as you'll see in a minute. The Kuiper belt is home to 3 officially recognized dwarf planets: Pluto, Haumea, and Makemake, or Makemake. Some of the solar system's moons, such as Neptune's Triton and Saturn's Phoebe, are thought to have originated in the region, in the Kuiper belt, and they were trapped somehow. How did they get to Saturn, which is a long way away? It's more than 30 astronomical units away at least. How did they get there?
Hitchhike on.
So let's read the next one, and then you'll know what happens in the far solar system. The next one is called the Oort cloud. They don't call it a belt anymore. Why? Because it's three-dimensional. The belts are exactly like belts. They're almost they're flat like a disc, but only like a donut. But the Oort cloud is all around the solar system, above and below everything, and that's what you have in this attempt at taking a picture from the computer screen, but you can look it up and see what it looks like. It surrounds the entire solar system. And the solar system is the tiny, they show you here, and they try to show you here. It's the little disk in the middle, and the Oort cloud is enormous. And it's tons and tons and tons of these small, I don't know what to call them, pieces of something. And they're floating and revolving around the solar system constantly.
What is it? What is revolving? The cloud is not the belts?
No, the belts are just like donuts.
And there's this cloud around it all.
What do they call it? Ken, it's a makif. Yeah. Icy planetissimals. No, it's 2 words. It's just a. Okay. So the Oort cloud, and now you can tell us how you say Oort in Dutch. It's another Dutch astronomer. Oort. Okay.
Named after Jan Oort.
Named after the Dutch astronomer Jan Oort, sometimes called the Epic or Oort cloud, is a theoretical. It's theoretical. We're not sure that this is what it's like, but it makes sense that this is what cloud of predominantly. Here it's almost all ice, icy planetesimals believed to surround the sun to as far as somewhere between 50,000 and 200,000 astronomical units, which is 0.8 to 3.2 light years. The next star, Vega, is only 4.5 light years away. So this thing extends pretty much to the next star. Okay? Why is it theoretical? We can't see them. How do we know where they're there?
How do they know?
We'll see what I'm saying. It is divided into 2 regions. The disc-shaped, like the belt, same thing, but it's a disc. It's not just a belt around. It's flat. It's full. Called the inner Oort cloud, and the spherical outer Oort cloud. Both regions lie beyond the heliosphere and in interstellar space. Heliosphere means the area in which the sun can be and still creates heat. So there's the outer boundary of what the sun reaches.
And how far the light rays go from the sun?
No, light rays go forever,
Further.
but the heat's dissipated already. I think that's what they mean by heliosphere. And in interstellar space, they're already in the space between the stars. The Kuiper belt and the scattered disk, the other two reservoirs of trans-Neptunian objects, are less than 1,000 as far from the sun as the Oort cloud. Now, this is why I want to get to this. The outer limit of the Oort cloud defines the cosmographical boundary of the solar system and the extent of the sun's Hill sphere. It's not called the heliosphere, it's a Hill sphere. It's a new definition. Don't ask me what it means. I think it means the direct gravitational impact of the sun, meaning that these things still revolve around the solar system in some way. It's a new definition for what it means for the sun, for the sun's influence, called the Hill sphere. I should read more about it. I didn't. The outer Oort cloud is only loosely bound to the solar system, thus is easily affected by the gravitational pull both of passing stars and of the Milky Way itself. These forces occasionally dislodge comets from their orbits within the cloud and send them toward the inner solar system. Based on their orbits, most of the short-period comets may come from the scattered disk, but some may have originated from the Oort cloud. So what do we know about comets? What are comets? They're these icy planetesimals that come from the Oort cloud. Something, it could be gravitational pull, it could be something hitting them, dislodges them from their orbit, and they're easily dislodged because they're not so affected by the sun, and then they're thrown into the inner solar system. Those are the comets that we see. Now there are some of them that are what we call short period comets. What's short period? 80 years, 90 years, 100 years, those are short. There's the long period comets which are thousands of years. These make, because it's so big, just to make one revolution, and they don't really make a revolution. What they do is they head towards the inner solar system, towards the sun, and then they're catapulted back out. So they go around the sun. As they approach the sun, they begin to burn off ice. That's what you see as a comet. And then they make a revolution around this, and they're pretty close to the sun. They come very close. And then because of the speed versus the sun's pull, in the end, the centripetal force throws them out.
There's a connection to
And they keep doing this.
astronomy and spherometry.
Maybe
No?
there's a lot of connections, but it's not what we're talking about.
Why are we talking about
I'm
this?
just wondering.
Does nobody get it yet?
No.
Of course you got it.
Because you said about the stars.
Talking about the Gemara and the
We're talking about taking two stars.
No.
The stars are gonna come
So
back.
maybe it came from, there were comets.
You're getting there.
So what?
Although no confirmed direct observations of the Oort cloud have been made, it may be the sort, like we said, there's no confirmed observations. We don't know that the comets are this. But now look at the beginning of the Gemara now. This is, it was worth it to hear this. Ala zikin, there's a bracha that you make when you see a comet. Okay? My zikin, what is a zikin? Shmuel, who's the great astronomer of the Talmud, he's the greatest astronomer of the Talmud, says, a comet, Shavita, Kochava de Shavit. It's what we call a comet. You make a bracha on this. Shmuel also said, there's something else he said about comets. He said, the paths of the sky, meaning the orbits, the path that planets travel, that everything travels, the constellations, the sun, are as clear to me as the paths of my city, Naharda. Except for comets. Why? That I do not know what they are. What is he saying? Why can't he know what they are? We just said. Because they take so long that even for a person to see one of them in his lifetime is rare. So he says everything we were able to calculate, because it happens at most over a year. So you live 70 years, even if the astronomers before you made a mistake, you correct it. If you're a good observer. And Shmuel was a great astronomer of the Talmud. So he says, I know everything. I know exactly how everything operates. One thing I can't figure out, it's not because I don't know, it's because I don't have enough data. I can't collect enough data. Nobody has enough data about comets. And you can't even know if it's the same one or not the same one. We're also not clear about these things. That's what they say. We don't know 100% what these near-Earth comets, these short period comets, where they come from, how they work. But it's theorized that that's where they come from. They come from the outer reaches of the heliosphere, from the Hill sphere. and they come towards the sun, and they go out, and they could be thousands of years in doing the one revolution. So you can't collect enough data. We even don't have enough data about them. You know, what they do, that's what's called astronomical archaeology, that they look for records of comets that came in antiquity, in the Middle Ages, and in Mamish in antiquity, to try to figure out what the periods of these comets are. Halley's comet is easy because it's every 89 years, or whatever it is. So in 19 whatever it was, they saw it. It wasn't a big deal, right? Because you, but some of these take, and you still have to dig deep. So look at what he says. And now I want to read it in Hebrew. V'gmire,
In Aramaic.
in Aramaic, Hebrew. Ugmire, and we have a tradition, Gmire, de lo avar kisla, v'avar kisla charav alma. We have a tradition that a comet does not pass Kisla. Kisla is Ksil. It's the same word that we had before. Here they say the Orion constellation. This gives it away right away. What is he talking about? It's not talking about Orion. Orion is a galaxy, is a constellation of galaxies. Each one is a different distance. It's something entirely different. You know what galaxies are. They could be billions of light years away. Or I don't know what Orion is exactly made out of, but it's made out of a number of galaxies. The stars that you see, most of them are galaxies. And there's a few of these stars together that are called Orion. And each one is a galaxy at a different distance. So comets don't come from there. Nothing comes from there. You understand how far away this is? You know what a billion light years is? It would take light a billion years to... Nothing comes from there. Where do things come from? From the outer solar system. So Kisla doesn't mean, says Ziv Ritchie, and he's right, 100% right. It can't mean that thing that people call Orion. That's not Ksil. What's the problem? The problem with Hebrew is, and the problem with the ancient world is, that there are few words to describe a lot of phenomenon. So sometimes, like in Neshama, I have Neshama, it means a billion different things. I have Chesed, and it means I have Dat, it means a billion different things. Why? Because I have few words to describe a whole range of phenomena. So Ksil, that Eov, it's a pasuk from Eov. I should have brought it, but it's a pasuk from Eov, this whole thing. And in chapter 8, I think. And here he uses these three words, Ksil, Kima, and the third one, I don't remember. We'll see in a second. Or say Ash, Ksil, V'Kima. Three names. Ash, Ksil, and Kima. Hashem creates Ash, Ksil, and Kima. What is he talking about? What, there's three special constellations that they're different than everything else. They have such an important meaning. Richie hit upon the fact that they're talking about these three asteroid belts. The one that's between Mars and Jupiter, called the asteroid belt. The one that's trans-Neptunian, it's after Neptune, all the way out to 50 astronomical units, which we call the Kuiper belt. And then the Oort cloud that we're not even sure exists today. But the Gemara, that's what it's talking about. So where do the comets come from? They come from there. This is shocking when you think about this. So I'm saying, I don't know if this is what Shmuel meant. Shmuel says, I don't know what these are. But we know. Where do you know from? Who knows where they know this from? They say, we know that if a comet passes, so now the simple thing would be that Ksil, if it crosses Ksil, what is Ksil? If it gets through to the inner planets, what does it do? Charav alma. It destroys the world. Because if one of these hits us, it's over. V'haka chazinan, says the Gemara, but we saw... What?
They have these theories that it's going to happen. Right.
Yeah, it's nonsense, because we know that Hashem's not going to bring another bubble. What is he saying? That this happened once, that's it. And when it happened, you're right, it destroyed the world. So the Gemara rejects this. He says, no, it can't be that it passes around. It can come even closer. Really, it doesn't mean that. What does it mean? It means the aura of the comet passes Ksil. Take Orion out, strike it out. It's not the right translation. It just means Ksil. It's this word in Hebrew that means a lot of things. It also means Orion. But here it means, apparently, the inner asteroid belt, the one between Mars and Jupiter. We know that it passes. So, and it appears as though the comet itself passes. Really what it's saying, the aura of the comet, meaning the tail, looks like, or what you see, when we see a comet, why can we see them? You can't see them. It's a reflection of the sun's light on the tail, on the ice that's being burnt. So that's what you can see, but you can't see the comet itself. The comet itself is dark; it doesn't give off light. Rav Huna, son of Rav Yeshua, said a different answer. It is merely the vilon, one of the firmaments that rips and furls, and the light of the next firmament is seen, and this appears like a comet. So he gives a different explanation. He says, no, it's not comets, really. These are meteors. That's what he's saying. It breaches the inner atmosphere. There's two types of things that you see. There's, what do you say a bracha on it? Do you say it on these comets that you see once every, like Halley's Comet, once every 90 years? Or do you say a bracha every time you see what we call a falling star? Ever seen a falling star? It's the easiest thing in the world. Look in a place that's dark, look at the sky for 2 minutes in the same place. You are guaranteed 100% to see at least one.
Really?
At least.
Experiment.
Anywhere.
Not even see one.
No, you have to stare in the same section because you can't. If you keep looking, you'll miss it, because there's so many meteors hitting the earth at every moment. They're all burnt in the atmosphere. They're tiny. They could be the size of a golf ball, but when they burn, you see them. So says Rav Huna, that's called a shavit. That's what you say the bracha on. You don't say the bracha on the ones that traverse, like Shmuel says. I don't know how they. No, that's not it. It's okay.
On which one you said the bracha?
On the falling star.
Oh, okay.
That's what people call. You make a wish or some nonsense like that. But in the Gemara, what it means is you're supposed to say a bracha al zikin.
Wait, that's Rav Ashi?
Rav Huna.
So what's Rav Ashi?
Rav Ashi said another explanation. It's not a comet that passes Ksil, but a star that is uprooted from one side of Ksil, and another star from the other side of Ksil sees it and gets startled and shudders and appears as if it is passing. What's that talking about? It's called a gravitational pull. That when one of these things moves, it begins to move others from the other side. In any case, it's almost 100% of what they're describing here is that comets come from these asteroid belts, these 3 asteroid belts, and their names are, as we'll see in the next section, Ash and Ksil and Kima. And it's true that Ash and Ksil and Kima were also used for other constellations and for actual stars. Now, what's so amazing about what Shmuel says now? Because they couldn't see any of these. You can't see the asteroid belt without a telescope. You can't see a series you can see with the telescope. The others we only know about because we sent probes out. You certainly can't see the trans-Neptunian, the Kuiper belt. The only one that can be seen with a telescope to any degree is Pluto. But there's at least a whole Earth worth of mass out there. And it's made out of ice mostly. And certainly you can't see the Oort cloud, and we don't even know that it's there. It's just theorized. But there's good reason to theorize that it's there. So how did he know that this is Ruach HaKodesh? There's no other explanation. So if he knows this, it's only Ruach HaKodesh. And it's amazing that this is what the Gemara is describing. It's by Nevuah. This only. How could you know anything like this 2,000 years ago? It doesn't make any sense. So Shmuel Rami, on the subject of the stars, says the translation here, the Gemara notes that Shmuel raised a contradiction between the two implications of the 2 verses with regard to the constellations. So it's not about constellations. We don't know. It's about stars. Anything. It could be anything. And it says, K'tiv, it says, Oseh Ash Ksil V'Kima. It says, He, meaning Hashem, makes, and again, strike out now Ursa Major, Orion, and Pleiades, and the chambers of the south. Instead, it's Ash, Ksil, and Kima. He makes these 3 things, Ash, Ksil, and Kima. And another verse, that's in Job 9, so it's not chapter 8, it's chapter 9. And there it sounds that Ksil comes before Kima. Sorry, that Ash comes before Kima. Sorry, so who comes first? What's the order of these 3? Who's closest to the sun? Who's furthest from the sun? So in any case, so here it sounds like Orion, which is Kima, comes before Ksil. And on the other hand, it is written, and this is already in the Navi, it's not in Job, he who makes Pleiades and Orion, meaning he makes Sil and Kima. So there it sounds like, again, how do they translate each one? In any case, which one? Ksil and Kima. Which one is the outer Oort cloud? Which one is the Kuiper belt? That's the whole. What do you call each? That's how you would translate it here. The Gemara. So how is this reconciled? The Gemara replies, "We're not for whose? For." I have to read it in Hebrew. Imalei chama shel ksil. Ksil is the one that's hot. Lo nitkayem olam mipnei tzina shel kima. Kima is cold and ksil is hot. Vilmalei tzina shel kima, and were not for the cold of kima, the world would not exist because of the heat of ksil.
There was a contradiction, basically, first, and then they came together.
Okay, that they're interdependent. It's not about their order, it's trying to say about a dependency between them. What is this about? So here again, Ziv had this incredible insight. He says, what is the I think the most accepted scientific theory about why the earth is as cold as it is. Why the earth is so full of life as it is. Why? Because there's a contradiction between what their dating tells them about the earth's age and how cold it is now, or how long life has been able to exist. What's the problem? The problem is that the scientific dating says that life has been around for at least 3.5 billion years. But the earth is only 4.5 billion years old. So the understanding is that 1 billion years is not enough for the sun, for the heat that was in the early earth to have dissipated to allow life yet. It should have been, at the end of a billion years, it should have been still at something like 1,000 degrees. And life obviously can't develop then. But for some reason, it went down tremendously suddenly to suddenly 30 degrees. And then life could form. There's another question, which is, when it's 1,000 degrees hot, how many of you know water that can be sustained at 1,000 degrees? There's no such thing. So where did the water come from? If it was that hot in the beginning, where did the water come from? So the accepted theory today, as far as I don't think anything is more accepted, is that the water that's on earth didn't come from earth. Where did it come from? From? Okay. What do you mean from the Shamayim?
Those ice.
Okay. That in the beginning of the formation of the solar system, a lot of these planetismals hit the earth. They were made out of ice, and thankfully, right, Hashgacha, they were all water ice, not ammonia ice, not methane ice. And they cooled the earth down, and in the end, that's the water that we have here. The water that we have here came from where? From above the earth. Remember what we started with, that the natural order of things is that there's earth, and then there's water.
That's also what happened.
Well, hold on, you're way ahead of us. So, but then it cooled down enough that the earth began to rise above the water. Why did it begin to? Because if it was so hot, then the water would have just covered it. And slowly as it cooled down, it became hard. And then because of tectonic pressure, mountains started rising above, the Tiraya Yabasha, and then suddenly, now I'm not condoning anything about these ideas about that the world is 4 billion years old. I don't think it's an issue at all, but it's not for now. It's a different issue altogether. So the water is extraterrestrial. The water that we have here, it didn't come from Earth. Some of the water was also captured when it cooled down. Some of the water was captured underneath the Earth's crust. And that's the subterranean water. So that's the coolness. One of these has a lot of coolness, and one of them gives a lot of heat. What does it mean that it's hot? What would make it hot? If ice hits the planet, so the water cools it down. What's the other option? What would happen if a solid piece of rock would hit the earth? It would raise the heat. It wouldn't cool it down. It would raise the heat, because if you've got something solid hitting something solid, creates heat. So that's what he's saying. In the early earth, there was a lot of heat. And there had to be struck some kind of balance between, and we know there were a lot of huge hits on the earth in the beginning. So some of these, where do they come from? They don't come from, I don't know, from Andromeda. They don't come from some other galaxy. They can't travel that far. They all come from the solar system, from the sun. En chadash tachat hashemesh. The sun's influence is everywhere that the sun, and this all is what created the earth the way that it is. So now you've got these solid rocks. These are the asteroids mostly from Mars, from the asteroid belt, the close one. Those create heat. The ones that are further out, they create cold because they're ice. So when they hit, they melt through the atmosphere. Another thing that they do, which is amazing, is when they burn through the atmosphere, what do you think they create? Apart from their impact, depends on how big they are. If it's over 5 kilometers wide, so we think that it'll hit the earth itself. But if it's anything less than that, I don't know exactly what the number is. There's all kinds of calculations. Depends on what angle it also hits the atmosphere. Anything less than that, it'll just burn up in the atmosphere. So what does it create? What? If ice, water ice, hits the atmosphere and burns up.
Vapor. Air?
Vapor. What do you get from vapor?
Water.
Rain. You get a lot of rain. Okay, so now we begin to see the whole picture. The whole picture is that when Hashem took out of Sil two, it means that He took two such planetismals. And the first one hit the earth. There's an important thing I said about the Rogachover. The Rogachover has this whole thing. When you read it, you're like, what do you want from my life? He has this whole thing that because the waters cleanse the earth, they purify the earth like a mikveh. In the same way, and again, this is all his gymnastics in his head. Then in the same way that all the water in the mikveh is considered to be one point, that's what he calls it. Like all the 40 sa'ah, for the mikveh to purify you, it has to be whole. What does it mean for a mikveh to be whole? The moment that it reaches 40 sa'ot, I don't know, size is like a gallon, let's say. So it's 40 gallons. The moment it reaches that, it becomes one unit, inseparable, meaning that if you add more, it doesn't matter at all. If you keep it at 40 gallons, it's always like one unit. So he says, because the waters from this he learns, because the waters of the Mabul were supposed to purify the earth, they also had to be 1 point. Huh? What? What do you mean they had to be 1 point? So the Rebbe has a sicha, an incredible sicha, in part 25, in Chal Kafei, where he explains what the Rogachover means. He doesn't explain it physically, it just means like this. He says that in the end, this is what Rashi says, that the Mabul was 40 days and 40 nights on the earth. And says, how could it have been 40 days and 40 nights on the earth? What do you mean? The Mabul doesn't happen 40 days and 40 nights. He says, no, when the water came, when Hashem collected it, he says, whatever it was, when Hashem brought it, it was the amount of water for 40 days and 40 nights altogether.
So what's wrong with that explanation?
Have you ever seen in the atmosphere 40 days and 40 nights? The atmosphere can't hold that much. The only explanation is that this is a planetesimal made out of ice. It's that amount of water, and it hits the earth. If you want to get into the Rogachover of this whole thing, and to Rashi, read that sicha. It's an incredible sicha. The Rebbe also does some mental gymnastics to make it work. But they've got this picture in this head that all the water came down at once. It was at least prepared all at once.
It wasn't really lasting 40 days? It was just
No, it lasted for 40 days and 40 nights, but somehow it all was there in the beginning. Before the Mabul started, it was all together in one thing. So what is that thing? There's no better description for what this is.
Because we're trying to explain it.
But then he says, okay. But then he says, that's from the impact. No, the burning was from, on the contrary. It sounds now that the burning was from the waters above. But in any case, the subterranean water is hot. It's much hot. It's not the cool ones that we dig from 200 meters. The real subterranean water, which starts at about 2-3 miles underneath the crust is in vapor form. That's why when you get a geyser, they come out as very hot. They're not. That's the real subterranean water, not the stuff that we drink.
The fish survive.
Don't ask me about everything at the same time. I don't know what the fish did. But so what happened? So it says that when the rain began to fall, it could have been rachamim. How could one of these not destroy the earth? Very easily. If the angle is just a little bit off, meaning, let's say this is the earth, if it comes straight down like this, it'll impact directly. And it will burn very little because there's a very little amount of atmosphere that it's going through. But if it grazes, it'll just make a lot of rain. If it hits at an angle that goes through a lot of atmosphere, most of it will be burnt in the atmosphere. It will make a lot of rain for 40 days and 40 nights. If the whole thing comes down, and that's what happened, that it made an impact, then it also impacted the earth itself, the mantle itself, the crust, and the crust, not the mantle, and that's what it was, an earthquake, and the waters underneath came out. What it's saying is that there was also a tremendous influx of water from beneath, which indicates that there was an impact, a very strong impact that shattered a lot of the way that we see the crust today.
They say the whole Kadua Haaretz.
And that's the main thing. The other remnant of this is that the Torah says that before then there were no seasons. The reason that we have seasons, and this is accepted anywhere that you read. Why do we have seasons? Because an asteroid once hit the Earth. Everybody says, like, there's no reason in the world why the Earth is at a 23 degree its axis off the 0 degree. It should have, anything that naturally occurs would be at 0 degrees. So everybody explains that it's because of some old impact. But really what this is saying is that only, if this was in the year 1656, so we're talking about 3,300 years ago. So 3,300 years ago, this is when the Earth received this 23 degree deviation. That's when the season started. That's what the Torah says. The Torah doesn't say that the Earth moved. It just says that the whole year that the flood was happened, you couldn't see the sky. But the interesting thing is that after it finished, and whatever the reason was, with this amount of rain, apparently the early atmosphere before the Mabul was full of dust particles, which is why you could not see a rainbow. This is another mimer from the Alter Rebbe, that the atmosphere was cloudy in the sense of dust. But with this amount of rain, this amount of water coming down, it cleaned the atmosphere out. And from that moment on, the rainbow could be seen. So this whole thing, what Ziv hit on here is just unreal. He's saying this is exactly what happened.
This is the whole dynamic between Chesed and Torah, ice and fire.
That's what they say, the future, the whole year will be like spring, and therefore all the Chagim will be abolished.
So
Because Pesach, there'll be Aviv the whole year.
okay,
Really?
one option.
Remember, he says in the beginning, he knows it from tradition. That's the same.
And he says this is how. But even then, he knows that comets are long period. This he could have known. It comes once every long time. He heard from this astronomer, from that astronomer. But that he builds the whole thing on this pasuk in Iyov, that there are three, Ash, Ksil, and Kima, and they know that one is hot and one is cold, and this is unbelievable. So, how could you check this? The truth is, it's easy to check this. You could build today a whole new science just based on this observation. It's very easy. Why? Because clearly this affected the atmosphere. The main thing that we have for dating is how we know how to date things is carbon-14. Carbon-14 does something like this. It says, as long as you're alive, you breathe air. Every living, every organic creature, plants and animals and humans, we all breathe air. What do we breathe? What's in the air? There's mostly nitrogen, a little bit of 20% oxygen, and then there's 3% CO2, right? CO2 has carbon in it. Nitrogen and oxygen don't. the little bit of carbon that there is, carbon is a very unique element because it has a very nice, what we call half-life. Its half-life is 5,700 years. So what does that mean? It means that carbon-14 has 5,700 years. Carbon exists in two isotopes. There's the carbon-12, which is the regular one, and there's the carbon-14. And they exist in some percentage in the atmosphere, meaning there's a certain amount, I think it's 10% to 90%, something like that. The carbon-14 is not radioactive, it's not anything, it's just an isotope of carbon. But it has a short half-life, which is easy to measure. So what do? You take an animal that's died, obviously it's not exchanging any more carbon with the atmosphere, right? So it's got whatever carbon content it has, it's the end of it. Let's say you have a bone. Bone is made mostly of carbon, so it's easier. You take the bone and you measure what is the percentage of carbon-12 to carbon-14 in the bone. If you get a deviation from 10 to 90, let's say you will get 595. So it means that this bone is 5,700 years old. Why? Because half-life means that half of the carbon-14 deteriorated back into carbon-12 over 5,700 years. So if I have, instead of 90-10, I have 95-5, it means that 50% of the carbon-14 became carbon-12. That's why it's not 90-10, it's 95-5. So I know that this bone died 5,700 years ago. That's the main way that we date. There's other methods also, but this is the main one. And it's the only one that we have any kind of good, what we call kiyul. You have to, what's it called? There's a word for it. It's all you do in the lab all day long.
The control group or something?
No, it's not control. You have to set your instruments. Let's say you have a scale. So the mechanical scales, even calibrate. Thank you. So you have to calibrate somehow. So because we have things that died, we know when they died. There's a gravestone, or we know something else about. We can check that it's right. Right? We can check that this thing should have had and we know that it's been dead for 200 years. We can see. What's the problem? That what this is telling us is the atmosphere completely changed 3,300 years ago. It's a different atmosphere. Because this thing brought in ice. And ice is H2O, but H2O always, there's no such thing, as far as I know, there's no such thing as pure ice. There's always air trapped, some form of air, some form of gas trapped in between. So this thing brought a lot of carbon with it. So, or another option is that when it hit, and this might be the second one that it talks about, two of them, it took part of the atmosphere with it. Because it might be the second one just grazed. Whatever it was, it hit and it took away part of the atmosphere. And so you have less carbon in the atmosphere than you think you should. So in any case, whatever it is, or some of the carbon solidified because of whatever reason. Anyway, there were changes, incredible changes. So now, let's say that I want to calibrate my instruments correctly. I can recalibrate based on the date of the Mabul, which I know exactly. I can say that until this date, it's the 1090, and before then I want to find out what it is. So I take something and I say, at most it could be another, let's say I believe the Torah, at most it could be another 1,600 years old. So let's now build a calibration for anything that's before the Mabul. You could do it. And from that you could calibrate everything. You could calibrate geology, you could build a whole new science. It's not so difficult. It has a lot of repercussions. What does it mean? It means that today science works on an axiom called that everything has always been the same, universally.
It's been the same?
Universally, parsimony. Okay? Everything is always universally the same. The laws of nature are the same everywhere. But most importantly, on Earth, the atmosphere has always been the same. There's no reason to assume it hasn't.
What about global warming?
So, right? We change it. In any case, that's the. Here we have that the Torah is clearly saying that no, it's changed. So how do I know what to do with changes? So the scientist says I can change in any way. Who knows what? Okay, go capture one of these planetesimals, and you can do that today, and look at what it's made out of. Understand what it added into the atmosphere. Understand what it caused, and you can recalibrate everything. But you have to assume a different axiom that the Torah is telling you the truth. That in the year 1656, there were 2 asteroid strikes on the Earth, and they were both icy apparently, or it could be one was icy and one was
What year?
1656.
Whoa, sorry, I'm doing.
Me? There could be a million mistakes in what I just said.
Right.
But I know with a little bit of, I think I have a little bit of sense of empirical science that this is a gateway to begin to do experiments in ways that have not been done. You just assume something different. You have to assume that the Torah is right. Now let's see what comes out. Especially if we can find a remnant, if we can find any trace of this strike, then it would facilitate the whole thing. Anyway, so that's how to see that what the Gemara is saying somehow. I don't know how it knows. And again, I don't know if this is what they even meant, but today, to say that Ash, Ksil, and Kimar, these 3 belts, or 2 belts and 1 cloud of planetesimals is just phenomenal. And it explains everything that's going on. That's like what he said, En chadash tachat hashemesh. Within the heliosphere, within the hill sphere, there's no new stuff introduced, because it can't. Where are you going to bring it from? That's what it means. Where are you going to bring another chunk of something? Another chunk of something doesn't travel between in open space. They're all captured. Everything's already captured by gravity around some star. So nothing will travel from it. That's what it means. En chadash tachat hashemesh. There's no new planets coming out. There's no new comets. Don't come from Andromeda. They don't come from anywhere. They come from within the solar system, and the solar system is pretty big. It's much bigger than what you thought it was. Okay.
Can you bring relevance to our counseling practice from these kind of scientific discussions?
You have to listen to even the people that seem really strange and saying strange things, and take them seriously and start thinking about it.
There's a lot.
Okay.